Good evening. Welcome today, Friday, August 10th, 2018. Welcome to the Woodchuck Report. Today's topic will be a continuation of last month's, which, if you weren't here, was talking about tariffs and our current tariff wars we're in, and some of the repercussions that are undergoing and happening, and some of the future repercussions which are projected from, well, basic economic theory, and which is slowly starting to happen and unravel. So, for a quick recap of what we discussed, last time we talked about what essentially is a tariff, and what is the purpose and ideologies behind tariffs. So, in the simplest term, a tariff is nothing more than a tax. It's added to the cost of imported goods, and it's one of several trade policies that governments can impose and try to. Well, there's a bunch of reasons why tariffs are put in place, and almost all of them are terrible ideas in of themselves. So different types of tariffs are created, and usually they're there to protect infant industries or to protect certain industries from outside, generally foreign competition. So they're used to protect domestic employment, they're used to protect consumers, they're used to protect infant industries, national security. In our case, is the rules that President Trump has utilized in working around the WTO trade agreements. And they're also used in retaliation, which is many of the countries which we have imposed tariffs on are starting to do. Hence why we call it a tariff war. We enacted a tariff on, for primary example, China, using the national security it's not a loophole, it was built in on purpose. So, but President Trump used the national security rule to impose tariffs on, say, China. And China has now retaliated with their own equal yet opposite tariff tax. And so now it becomes a tit for tat or a tit for tax at this point. So the different types of tariffs that government apply are special tariffs, ad valorem tariffs, licenses, import quotas, voluntary export restraints, and local content requirements. So, and some of the benefits, if you can argue there are benefits, is because one of the benefits that does happens is that government sees increased revenue because as imports enter the domestic markets, and then domestic industries benefit because they get reduced competition since their imports now, which is generally speaking their competition, is at a higher price, which has been artificially inflated. Individual and businesses are going to face higher import prices due to higher prices for their goods. For example, if you make canned goods, you have to buy aluminum. If there is a import tariff on aluminum, that means the aluminum that you do buy for your canned goods is going to be at a higher price, in which, when it comes to higher prices, always gets passed on to the consumers. So the businesses get higher price for their quality, for their materials they use, and then that higher price gets passed on to the consumers. So we, the consumers, end up paying a higher price. So those are just the basics of what a tariff is. So now, on our current policy of what's going on with the tariff wars, has been continued by President Trump. So we have now applied approximately $34 billion worth of tariffs to Chinese goods. It's our main tariff target that he did impose on. But there are others, such as the EU, Canada, Mexico, which he has threatened to put tariffs on. With Canada, Mexico, and the EU, with Canada, Mexico, aluminum and iron, and with the EU, he's now threatened on auto. And if those of you who aren't too familiar with the auto industry, the European Union as a whole does not really buy American cars by and large. We buy far more of their cars than they do. For example, Volkswagen, Audi, BMW, Porsche, Volvo, and the list is relatively large. So, but our main competitor right now, the target that he put on, is China. So he's put on about $34 billion worth of Chinese goods, and now he's threatened to put tariffs on every single Chinese import or goods that we import from China, all of them. So some of the consequences of that is going to be relatively high because China is one of the largest source of imports for the majority of the 50 states. I'm not including any U.S. territories because I haven't quite found the data for this, but as I do, I'll continue to update you. So, China being the largest source for approximately 23 states, they are the single largest import source for 23 of those states. And out of all 50 states, they are the top 3 for 47 states. So out of the 23 out of 50 states, China is the largest source of imports. And out of 47 states, they're the top 3 imports. Now, political consequences, which eventually this is what it's going to boil down to, since we are coming on to an off-presidential election, and this could boil into a presidential election, which is, if it's not about politics, it's going to be about politics. So, political consequences. Well, out of those 23 states, 15 of those states have China as the top imports, and those 15 states have, coincidentally voted for Trump in 2016. Now, the administration has announced that as of last Tuesday, he's going to import and he's going to add on another 25% tariff on the $16 billion worth, which is worth $16 billion, which will be on top of the already $34 billion that's already been subject to. And this is directed at China currently. Now, he has moved for a plan to add, and as I said, another bunch of tariffs onto all Chinese imports, which will be approximately worth $200 billion. Now, Chinese goods, by and large, are just over 21% of all U.S. imports. So by adding tariffs to every single Chinese good, it's going to raise prices. A little over 21%, it's 21 and change. So of all import tariffs, a little over 21% is from China, which putting tariffs on that means it's going to increase prices all over the board. Now, so some of the states are going to face different consequences because obviously each state has different import and export economics. So this data is coming from the U.S. Census, for those of you who want to question me. So for 23 states, China is the top import source, and for 45 out of the 50 states, China is in the top 3. Now, and for 47 out of the 50 states, China is the top 5 imports. And so the states that are excluded from this are North Dakota, Louisiana, Delaware. So North Carolina, the top import is China. Sorry, North Dakota, Louisiana, and Delaware. For North Dakota, the top import is Canada. And for Louisiana, the top import is, this was surprising to me, Venezuela. And for Delaware, the top import source is Canada. So those are some of the things that are going to be happening future down the road. So going back to the tariffs, the question we want to start asking is, why is he doing these tariffs? Now, me personally, he's doing the tariffs because he's make America great again. Fortunately, he's going the wrong direction, my personal opinion. But besides that, why tariffs? So, tariffs are nothing more than a trade barrier, which can be used to be pro-producer and anti-consumer. And so, what that means is, in the short run, the higher prices for the goods reduce consumption by both individuals and for businesses. The higher price you pay, you tend to buy less. Basic supply demand. As prices increase, if supply stays the same, demand drops. So, but in the long run, what you end up seeing is businesses, they tend to see a decline in efficiency. This is due to a lack of competition. Competition tends to breed innovation. Innovation tends to make industries efficient. So inefficient industries tend to cause bigger problems for a variety of different reasons. But a lot of times they have little to no reason to innovate. Now, so this lack of competition is going to see a reduction in profits overall. This is in the long run due to the addition of substitute goods. These are goods that are maybe equal to but inferior to the normal goods. So for the government itself, they will see increase in demand for public services because this will tend to, as the prices go up, those who are on limited or fixed income will have to spend more of their income onto their basic goods for whatever reason, which would then mean that other sources will have to be made up. Public goods is the substitute good in this case. So going on, so this increased prices for imported goods, domestic producers are not forced to reduce prices from competition. So that's going to mean domestic consumers are left to be paying a higher price, as I said earlier. So the tariffs are also going to reduce inefficiencies because they allow companies that are not competitive to remain open. As an industry, if you do not have competition, you have less reason to innovate, which reduces efficiency. In strong competition, if you're a company that cannot innovate, you tend to get squeezed out of the market. Big example, if anyone remembers the heydays of BlackBerry. BlackBerry lost out to Apple and Microsoft somehow, and Android, which is a Google product. Now, tariffs, they increase prices and they limit the volume of imports. Obviously, increased prices reduces consumption. And since prices increase, more domestic companies are willing to produce those goods, which in effect reduces imports and increases domestic production, but at a higher consumer price. The higher price of a good tends to bring in more competition, but if the import competition is reduced, domestic competition kicks in at the new higher price. Now, in terms of our global trade here, in modern trade, some of the things that are going to be is that the tariffs were originally struck out in trade agreements through the WTO, which is one of the largest World Trade Organization, one of the largest trade agreements that we have. It's composed of, well, I'll get to that later. So the things that the WTO enacted is they made it more difficult to levy tariffs, made it for various governments to levy tariffs or tax on imported goods, and it reduced the likelihood of retaliatory taxes. Now, they did include wording that a government could impose tariffs through the national interest. If a common commodity is deemed in the interest of the country, then the government can impose tariffs on it, which is the rule that Trump enacted, saying aluminum and steel were critical to the country's national defense, and therefore we had to put tariffs on it. Is that true? No, it is not, because our largest aluminum and steel imports come from Mexico and Canada and not from China. China is actually our 5th largest, and it's actually tied with Japan. So we get more metals from Japan than we do from China, yet somehow China is our #1 target for this tariffs. Now, China in their retaliation targeted the agricultural industry back here in America. And for those of you who don't realize, President Trump has now authorized approximately $12 billion worth of tariffs, tariff release of direct aid to farmers to offset the falling prices the falling demand that they're going to lose out on because of said tariffs. So if you're trying to find that logic circle, he put tariffs on China to help the producers. China put retaliatory prices on agriculture, and agriculture is now suffering, so So President Trump now authorized more than essentially a bailout for those agricultural producers. So if he really wanted to do it, he could just eliminate the tariffs and they would be better off. Because when it comes to soybeans, 64% of our soybean exports goes to China. So China is not being dumb with this whole tariff war. They're targeting their tariffs smartly, for the lack of a better term. So, going back to the WTO, I've sidetracked on. The WTO especially, but generally international organizations, they attempt to reduce production and consumption distortions, which tariffs and taxes cause. And so for like domestic producers making goods due to inflated prices, that tariff does increase. Consumers will end up purchasing fewer goods. Higher price causes fewer production. So since the 1930s, this would be post-stock market crash of the 1929, many developed countries have reduced tariffs and trade barriers, which has helped improve global integration and brought about globalization. So a bunch of multilateral agreements have increased the likelihood of tariff reduction while enforcing binding agreements, which helps reduce government uncertainties. Now, one of the benefits, one of the many things that most free trade advocates agree on is that free trade benefits consumers through increased choices and reduced prices. So, in the global economy has brought about many uncertainties, but through all these unilateral agreements and reduction in tariffs and these tax barriers, many consumers especially have had reduced prices, increased consumption, and helped increase global integration. Now I'm going to pull up back to tariffs. So the newest thing that came to me today earlier is that back to the whole tariffs. Now President Trump has decided to add tariffs on metals coming from Turkey, and this has had the consequence of sending the Turkish lira, that's their unit of currency, into a free fall. So, and this is mostly a tit-for-tat political strike, because Turkey and the U.S. have had some certain agreements, especially over a pasture, I believe. Let me get you the full story. So, Trump tweeted he authorized a 20% duty on aluminum and a 50% duty on steel coming from Turkey. So the announcement has turned a run on Turkish lira into a rout, and the Turkish lira has dropped more than 18% to the new record low against the dollar. Now, I'll find you the reason, because it actually states the reason is. Sorry, it reset on me. Where is it? Well, it's based on because of a pastor who was put on trial for sorry, I just had it. I apologize. Nope, I had it. All right. So, I found it. One of the triggers for the turmoil was because it was a stand-up because of the detained American pastor Andrew Brunson. Turkey, being a NATO ally, was put on trial for espionage and terror-related charges linked to the failed coup attempt in the country 2 years ago. If you remember, there was a coup d'etat against Erdogan back 2 years ago that happened, and Erdogan still ended up coming out on top. But this pastor was put on trial. So, the U.S., Washington, demanded the pastor's release, and last month they imposed financial sanctions on 2 Turkish ministers. Press release and put on the Turkish ministers. So there have been meetings in Washington between the U.S. and Turkish officials, which ended earlier this week with no apparent resolution. So that is the reason we have. And I have a blinking light, but I don't think that's a phone call. That is not a phone call. So, with that is what I have for today. I will leave you on our next topic that I'm going to talk about, is once it goes away, is when it comes to economics, talking about perfect competition. So I talk a lot about free market. Maybe you heard a lot about we talk about tariffs in the last couple of shows. Next thing I'm going to talk about is perfect competition and what this actually entails, for example. So one of the things is, what is perfect competition? And I'll leave you with this, is the definition. Pure or perfect competition is a theoretical market structure in which the following criteria are met. All firms sell an identical product. By that, I mean the product is a commodity or homogeneous. All firm prices are all firms are price takers, which means they cannot influence the market price of their product. The market share has no influence on price. Buyers have complete or perfect information in both the past, the present, and the future about the product being sold and the price charged by each firm. And resources such as labor are perfectly mobile, and firms can enter or exit the market without cost. So that is the definition of perfect competition, and be discussing, breaking down perfect competition, imperfect competition, and why we don't have perfect competition in the actual reality, and why it's only theoretical and talked about, and some of the challenges of having a perfect competition, and where certain government regulations kick in. So with that is what I have you. I've been giving my 30-second anyways, but we're good. So I wrapped it up, so you have a good day. And remember, November, we're voting off-year elections, so please register your vote, get all your people registered, even if I don't believe in the blah, 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 whatever dumb reason they're gonna have, please ask them. It's still important. It's why it's one of the basic rights we have as citizens. And so you can't really talk if you don't do the walk. So get all your people to vote. It doesn't really matter who they vote for, as long as they vote. So with that, I have you good night, good evening, and enjoy yourselves. Don't do anything I wouldn't do.